up the cytosine and the different aspects of the DNA molecule, they begin to switch and fall off because it gets oxidated. Now, oxidation is a process where it's exposed to the environment and living tissue begins to just get corrupted and breaks down. Now, this is well established science that when you're dealing with old DNA, you cannot take that old DNA and take those changes that are really the degradation of the DNA and say that's a mutation that caused a physical change in the organism. Does this make sense? Okay. I'm not wanting to get too technical here because I know we're talking not to a scientific public, but a general public. But just imagine that something's been laying around for over 100 years with the environment decaying it, and then a group of scientists at Stanford and UCSF take it and say, voila, we have found 7 never before seen combined bone syndromes that resulted in this unusual creature that looks nothing like a human being. And that's what they did. That's what they did. And it gets more complicated than that, but I don't want to bore you. They basically took over 1 million places where there were these changes from the degradation, picked 60 some of them, and had on places that would explain bone deformity and claimed that those were new, never before seen syndromes. Now, this leap of conclusion that's in the article, which went worldwide with the help of the intelligence community, I'm going to get to this in a moment, so that it was on the front pages everywhere, completely submarined the idea that this could be an unusual new species or specimen, notwithstanding the fact that Nolan and his colleagues knew about the Russian one, notwithstanding the fact that Dr. Nolan himself told me that he knew that DNA that had been degraded out in the environment would have problems in terms of reaching these conclusions. And in one email, he says he would not reach those conclusions. In fact, in an email dated on December 30th of 2013, in this email, he states that the chances these genes would come up by chance, meaning a mutation, are infinitesimal. Infinitesimal. I'm quoting. Well, what happened? Well, the next thing we know, he is not at all talking, he cuts off communication with us, and I'm the principal investigator who supplied him this sample and spent tens of thousands of dollars to take a whole research team over to Barcelona to get the CAT scans, the x-rays, the sample, etc., and so on. And he ends up joining up with this group, this To the Stars Academy group with Tom DeLong. We'll get to this in a minute. And they facilitate the global fake disclosure that this is suddenly couldn't possibly ET related, that the case is closed, it's a deformed human fetus. Here's the problem with all of this, is that the research paper he put out is so dense, and unless you have a PhD in genetics, you're not going to understand it. That's the first thing. Secondly, it appeared and got through the peer review of genome research. Everyone listening needs to contact Dr. Sussman, Sussman, and she is the editor of genome research, and point out that this paper, according to the top geneticists in the world, should have never made it through peer review, period, full stop. It would have gotten a 0 rating, is what he has stated. Number 3, that they cherry-picked. It's sort of like Dick Cheney, cherry-picking the intelligence to put Colin Powell in front of the UN to say, see, he has weapons of mass destruction, let's go in there and have a $2 trillion war that kills hundreds of thousands of people. This is the scientific equivalent of what Dick Cheney did in terms of data, but because of people's respect for that journal and the fact that the corruption between the media and the intelligence community facilitated this obscure report on this obscure case being headline front page news worldwide, the whole world thinks the case is closed. When, my friends, the case isn't even begun. Because there's another case that has to be done. We are calling for a full investigation of Stanford, UCSF, Cold Spring Harbor, and Genome Research Magazine. The process of how this made it through peer review when this top global scientist has said absolutely it should never have been published. And also, how was the data manipulated? Now, last night I received another report where he said that in talking to 10 different molecular biologists and geneticists, not a single one thought the paper had any credibility. Now, I'm a medical doctor. I am not a PhD geneticist. So I am relying on these other experts. But these other experts are saying this is completely without merit. Now, how does something without merit make its way into one of the most, if not the most, prestigious genetics research magazine on earth? How does that then become front page news on the New York Times and CNN? I think we need a full investigation for the possibility, now we can't prove this, of some kind of deliberate act of corruption. And if the process in academia on this has been corrupted, we are in very big trouble on this planet, because what that means is that the tricks that were being done in the 50s and 60s, which we'll get to in a moment, where the CIA, and we can prove this because we have documents under FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act, where the CIA deliberately has gone in to academic institutions, put people under some duress for some reason, and forced them to say and do things to change the scientific opinion. Let me give you one very famous example. Probably everyone listening knows about Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book was the kind of window dressing research end of the Air Force in the United States looking into UFOs. The real action was going on in unacknowledged special access projects, which we expose in this book. If you haven't read this book, you must get it. We are actually, because of this emergency that's happened, we're putting this available for anyone to get it half off on our website at SeriousDisclosure.com. And if you get the DVD that goes with this, you can get this for free. So you need to go and get it and read it and study it. We don't have time to go through all of that here today. We have so much material to cover. But in 1969, the Air Force pretended to have an objective study of UFOs done, where it was predetermined that the UFOs were not real. And the head of the committee was a Professor Condon at the University of Colorado in Boulder. He was a renowned scientific figure. He assembled a lot of other very renowned scientific figures but he made one mistake. He got one honest scientist on his team named Dr. Robert Woods. Let me tell you what happened, and this is in the disclosure material, and you must read this. Dr. Woods was a senior research aerospace scientist at McDonnell Douglas Aerospace, which became part of Boeing a few years ago. But at that time, and he worked with and knew Old Man McDonald personally. Mr. McDonald and he worked together, so he was on this Condon committee. And the Condon committee, when he started bringing hard evidence of the facts and the truth, Professor Condon personally went to the head of McDonnell Douglas Aerospace, Mr. McDonald, to get Dr. Woods fired and get him not only all thrown off the committee, Condon committee, but fired from McDonnell Douglas, because Dr. Woods had such integrity. He was saying, no, these are legitimate cases. Here are actual photographs. Here are actual videos. Here's actually places where these have landed. Here are government documents. And he was doing what I was, this is sort of 50 years ago, of course. And luckily, Old Man McDonald was quite fond of Dr. Woods and said, no, I'm not going to fire you. and he kept him on. But Dr. Woods was thrown off the committee. The next thing you know, this fake committee, headed up by Dr. Woods, issues a report saying the UFOs aren't real. There's no reason for the government to study it. Let's close Project Blue Book. And they use that report to close any government official publicly overseen investigation of UFOs. What I'm telling you is fact. I then, after I personally briefed the director of the CIA, James Woolsey, I put in a FOIA request, and I got documents about the Condon Committee. And in these CIA documents, it explicitly says that Dr. Condon was working for them, was an asset of the CIA, and that this had to be kept away from the public knowledge, because if it was known, it would create a public scandal. Now, what I am sharing with you here is not in debate. This is proven through FOIA requests. These are official government documents, not ones that have a questionable provenance or did someone forge them. These were officially released. I have them in my archive. The question becomes, and I'm reasoning this is a question, we can't prove this yet. Is this what we're witnessing, Carol, in front of our very eyes this past week or two? That we have another situation of unbelievable government and collusion and corruption with academia, resulting in what has happened to this poor Atacama skeleton. Now,
Dr. Greer, I just want to mention this is what you have brought attention to that ties in with what I've been focusing on too, the U.S. Space Command now. The whole purpose of this secrecy, as you call it, the hoax, as Von Braun called it, the last card, is about, and it says it in Vision 2020, this is another document that you have, the Space Dimension of Military Operations is actually being designed to, quote, protect U.S. interests and investment, integrating space forces, and now we're hearing space forces, the Space Command being turned into space forces, into, quote, war-fighting capabilities across the full spectrum of conflict. And that's what you're leading this into.
Yes, and this is where I'm going to connect the dots over the course of this 2-hour show. I'm trying to be methodical in what I'm presenting here. There is something very strange that happened, and at a certain point, we got an email from the director of, and this was actually on the blog of the director of Sirius, and I'm going from Kalika, and he says Gary Nolan, Dr. Nolan, was visited by agents from some form. This is not me saying this is Kalika, from some form of federal level. He told me on the record, on a phone call, which federal investigators most likely now have in their possession. Afterwards, he reversed his findings. Now he's working directly with former CIA and NASA experts in the UFO field on a multi-million-dollar project. Now, this was posted March 23rd, 2018, the day after this journal report appeared.
The anniversary of the introduction of the Strategic Defense Initiative Space-Based Weapons Program,
correct.
March 23rd.
Correct. Now I want to connect another dot. And I'm bringing this up, I'm wanting to be careful here for legal reasons. I have a very trusted member of my team who has been with me for a couple years, who also works with senior military officials in India, and up to and including the president, the prime minister. He had a meeting with Tristan Harris. Tristan Harris is who I have also met with. Tristan Harris is the Harris chair. He's the head of that trust that endows Dr. Nolan's chair at Stanford University. And Tristan Harris, in his conversations with my colleague, stated that the reason they had to change the story on this was that there was too much pressure, that it was too explosive, that they were afraid. And what my associate said is that it was quite clear there had been some sort of threat or inducement to cause them to not want to say what this skeleton, which anyone who wants to go on our website and look at it, who is a doctor or even a layperson, will conclude certainly is not a human, will say. And apparently, this was of such great concern. This contact flew all the way from San Francisco after his meeting with Tristan Harris, whose trust is endowing the Harris chair that Dr. Nolan occupies at Stanford, and comes back to meet with me in Washington to say something's very wrong here. And now this was about a year ago or so, before this report came out. The next thing I know, which is very concerning to me, I get something from John Rappaport. And John Rappaport is an investigative reporter who was drilling down on this strange little group known as the To the Stars Academy. There's an aging rock star named Tom DeLonge who sort of headed it up, but he has apparently become someone manipulated by many of these people in the intelligence community. And this report goes through who these folks are. Now let me just give, and now we've learned that this Dr. Nolan, Gary Nolan at Stanford, is a member of this team. One of them is a guy named Luis Elizondo. He was the Pentagon chief of a secret program from 2007 to 2012 to study and explore UFO activity. Of course, it was all couched as a threat, and it was funded in part by the Pentagon, our tax dollars. It was $22 million that then went to Bigelow Aerospace, some of it. And this particular person, Elizondo, we did a research on him. Senator John Warner, who has been a member of the cabal keeping this secret, he's now retired, and he's 90 years old. His son told me that one of his closest friends, who just retired from the Office of Naval Intelligence, stated that Elizondo was the master counterintelligence disinformation person he had ever seen at the Pentagon. And he is the person in the center of this To the Stars Academy group. Just giving you the facts. So I think what we need to do is stick with the facts here. Now there's another man, Jim Semivan. He's from the CIA Directorate of Operations for 25 years. Dr. Hal Puthoff has been working with the National Security Agency, General Electric, Sperry, Stanford University, interestingly, and SRI International, and regularly advises NASA and the Department of Defense and the intelligence communities. Chris Mellon, he served 20 years in the federal government, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, and interestingly is a descendant of Paul Mellon, who along with Allen Dulles founded the CIA. More about this later. Norm Kahn, who has a 30-year history with the CIA. And then you get down to the second page of his report, Dr. Gary Nolan, of the Ratchford and Carlotta A. Harris Professor in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at the School of Medicine at Stanford. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. Very worrisome, because you'll know them by the company they keep. And what I'm saying here is there is this, at the time that we handed off this precious, one of a kind, we'll never get a sample like this again, of the bone marrow of this skeleton, the Atacama Humanoid, to Dr. Nolan. He was enthusiastic. He reported to his top geneticist that there were amazing findings, that 90% of the DNA didn't match to humans, which is much, much less than a chimpanzee or a gorilla. And the next thing you know, he's on this advisory group chock full of counterintelligence spooks, CIA people, Pentagon people, and then all of a sudden, after 5.5 years of a delay, this report goes into the world's most prestigious genetics journal and gets headline news all over the place, saying, case closed, there's nothing to this. This smells like the Condon Committee. It feels like the Robertson panel. Now, what was the Robertson panel? A little bit of history. In the 50s, we have documents, a whole sheaf of documents from the FOIA requests from the CIA that we did, that describe the Robertson panel being a 1950s iteration of this process, where they talked about engaging scientists to hoax UFO events and photograph them, later come out and prove they were a hoax, but make them look like actual UFO pictures and things that are being reported by the public. Now, this is not a contested document either. So this kind of corruption of academia and then collusion with big mainstream media outlets, which, as you know from the Air Force intelligence officers reporting in the movie and the book Unacknowledged, states very clearly that they used to carry bags of cash. I'm quoting. Richard Doty said point blank, we would carry bags of cash to affect the outcome of a story or to get the cooperation of these editors and national security correspondents at the national media in the United States. So there is no question that the media has been corrupted by these illegal, unacknowledged special access programs, and that the Fourth Estate is dead. Some years ago in the 1990s, I met with a guy named Bob Schwartz. He was on the board of Time Life magazine. And he said to me, he says, Dr. Greer, we have become scribes taking dictation from the right hand of the king. That we absolutely have no independence when it comes to something this explosive. And that the Fourth Estate, the press, is dead on this. And they will only report what the intelligence community tells them to report. And that is what everyone listening needs to know, is what's happening in real time in front of our very eyes. So you don't have to go back 60 years to the 50s or 50 years to the 60s. This is happening in front of our very eyes today. So that's why I wanted to be on your show, to give you this big picture of what's actually going on. Now, I also have a document that's called, it's in our article on our website called Media Play from the CIA. And I'll hold this up. This is an official document from 1991. I hope you can see it. And they have some things blackened out on it, like the spooks always do. But one of the interesting things it says, we have relationships with reporters from every, underline their emphasis, major wire service newspapers, news weeklies, and television networks in the nation. This is the United States from the CIA. This has helped us to turn intelligence failure stories into success stories and has contributed. In many instances, we have persuaded reporters to postpone, change, hold, or even scrap stories that could have adversely affected what they wanted the public to know. So this is what's more interesting and apropos to today is there's also somewhere in here there's one that has the same thing it says about academia. This is under B in this same CIA document I held up. Current program. The agency, meaning the CIA, has a wide range of contacts with academics through recruiting, professional science societies, contractual arrangements, and OTE. We have recently been designated the focal point for all information about CIA's relations with the academic community, and that we are engaged in recruiting scholars in residence, etc. This is very concerning. This paper states point blank, we're corrupting academia. Now, just so you know, it is illegal for the CIA to do anything in the United States. That would be the FBI's domain. And here we have documents talking about the corruption in the media and academia. And in this case, this poor little Atacama Humanoid case, we have a headline news all over the world. Here's the LA Times saying, case closed. This 6-year-old 6-inch creature is in fact a fetus that we aborted. This is unbelievable scientific misconduct.